I'd first met the soul-destroying hills of Camp Pendleton, California, in the middle of July after some troubling days in the desert. If you've never heard of the place, that's good, because it's pretty much just a bunch of trees, poison oak, and never-ending hills. You start to grow a very specific hatred for gravity if your main mode of transportation is feet. Imagine climbing a massive hill, just to realize that you have to go all the way down and climb up an even bigger hill on all fours this time, and then some more after that. Suppose that's a lot like my life outside the field lately. This recent encounter with weird stuff happened just recently, so the impression left on me is still pretty fresh. I've been in the field so much that I haven't had much time or desire to reflect upon the past. This was actually my first time in Camp Pendleton, and it was our last field op before deployment, so our command really went all out on this one to grind us down. The first few days consisted of some pretty good training, extremely realistic with actors and stuff like that. Can't say too much, but I can complain. Long days in humid heat. Never enough sleep. After all that business, we moved to a different location after that. I won't name it specifically, but it was an area that people do not use to train anymore. Perhaps it was because of all the overgrowth and inaccessible terrain that made it very hard to get resupplied on water and food. The first day, we were sent off into the hills to go beat the enemy for another 2 platoons. One platoon was defending the base, and one was out looking for us. The day we hiked out there, in the middle of nowhere, was particularly hot. All the water we had was on our backs, and most of us ran out by the time we got there. Spent the afternoon hiding in the shade from both the enemy patrols and the deadly sun. We got a water resupply before the sun set, and life got a little better. When the last bit of light vanished from the horizon, myself and a few guys climbed up on the huge hillside on all fours with some nifty thermal optics and a ton of batteries. Our job was to observe the valley beneath us and make sure no one would sneak up on the rest of the platoon. We took turns observing and sleeping, so it wasn't all that bad. I had the first hour and didn't see anything but some rabbits and a few deer. My hour was up, so I handed them off to the next guy and found a nice rock to rest my head on. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard the well-known "what the fuck" from the guy scanning the valley. I tried to ignore it and get some well-needed sleep, just like in real life, but he came over to wake me up a minute later. "Hey, dude, come check this out." My response was something like, "No, fuck off, I'm trying to sleep." "No, seriously, look at it. It's something crawling or some shit." With an annoyed sigh, I sat up and crawled over to our spot. My friend handed me the thermals, and I looked around dumbly for a few seconds as he talked me on. "Okay, look below those 2 trees that look like a middle finger. Yeah, it's right next to the bush shaped like a dog smoking a cigarette. We're really good at this, okay?" I found what I was looking at. White figure contrasted on a background of grey and black. Could have been a rabbit, so I zoomed in. Expensive optics, remember? And sure enough, it looked like some weirdly shaped person pulling himself forward with his arms. I spent a few minutes trying to rationalize just what the hell it was, but I had nothing. The way it was moving was just painfully unnatural. I had a strong sense that it was cutting through all the trees and bushes and staring straight at me. I was almost too scared to move, because then he'd really know I was out here or something. I decided to wake up the guy with the radio, some sergeant we jokingly called Scoutmaster because he takes everything way too serious. He immediately got to action and called in a fake fire mission on them. Except when we ran the mission up, they told us that no one was there. The closest enemy unit was a bunch of snipers a few kilometers away, nowhere near us. They told us to wait a few minutes whilst they figured out who was out there. So we waited. And we waited, as this weird mass of white crawled towards us slowly. An hour passed, 500 meters turned to 200 meters. I didn't want to look at it anymore. Such a terribly dreadful feeling, so I gave the optics to someone else. We lost sight of it while it tried to crawl up our hill and onto the foliage. All 6 of us were deadly silent now, and hiding in our respective bushes, waiting for some radio call to say it was an enemy that was unaccounted for on the battle tracker. One big joke. Good one, snipers. I nervously tapped the trigger on my M4 loaded with useless blank rounds. Pretty soon we could hear the faint sound of someone shuffling around in the vegetation and foliage. Then it got very quiet. Minutes felt like hours, and sweat was pouring off of me at the pleasantly cool hour of 2 a.m. I don't know who saw it first, but all I got was a glimpse of it. White grey skin, dark eye sockets, and long limbs, just dragging his body along the ground with his hands. Our response was to stupidly shoot at it with our blank rounds. I don't know why we did that, because he slowly stood up straight and looked in my soul. Imagine how a mouse feels staring at a cat before it gets snatched up. Our fear only seemed to make him stronger. Only choice was to run down the hillside. It was more like falling and sliding on our butts at times. As we fell down this hillside, we grabbed bushes and trees to slow our momentum just enough to choose a path. We got to the bottom of the hill and took a few seconds to turn the expensive optics back on where we just were. Couldn't see him. Cool. Real fucking cool. I could only imagine this thing gnawing my face off in my sleep. We got back to the rest of the platoon and blah-blahed to our leadership about this thing. The decision was to move to the biggest fucking hill at around 4 a.m. with no illumination whatsoever from the moon. By the time we reached the top, the sun was beating down on us and we were all out of water. Not many bushes or trees in regards of shade or obscuration. If the enemy tried to attack us, they would be dead from exhaustion by the time they made it to the top, because we could barely stand after going up that hill. Especially with 100 pounds of gear and weapons on our backs. We spent the day trying to survive the heat. We sent a patrol out to get water, and they didn't come back till nighttime since one of the guys collapsed from the heat. For our own safety, we didn't do anything that night besides watch the surrounding area for the dragging thing. In the morning, we made our way downhill and hiked a few miles to conduct an all-out assault on the enemy base. Nothing too exciting, just exhausting. I was glad to get away from wherever we were. Once we took over the base, we sat around in the shade and drank water while we swapped roles with the opposing force. It was their turn to be the enemy.